Thank you. For all in attendance today, please note that this meeting is being live streamed on NCPC's website. I am Robert Miller, Vice Chairman of the National Capital Planning Commission, and I am chairing the meeting today because our Chairman, Preston Bryant, unfortunately could not be with us. Noting the presence of a quorum, I would like to call the meeting to order, and if there is no objection, the open session agenda is adopted as the order of business. Agenda item number 1 is the report of the chairman. That would be me. So I would like to note that Chairman Bryant received a letter from Mayor Vincent Gray designating Ellen McCarthy, who is acting director of the D.C. Office of Planning, as his first alternate, and Jennifer Steingasser, who's deputy director, development review and historic preservation in OP, as his second alternate to this commission. Hopefully, Ellen will be joining us shortly. Agenda item number 2 is the report of the executive director.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield my time to our general counsel for the legislative update.
Okay, great. Ms. Scott.
Two quick items. On Monday, the House passed amendments to the Height Act, which would enable the use of penthouses for human occupancy subject to limitations of 1 story, 20 feet in height, and a 1-to-1 setback from the building edge. The act now moves to the Senate. Also this week, H.R. 4489 was introduced. This act calls for the redesignation of Pershing Park as the National World War I Memorial and includes authority for an existing World War I Centennial Commission to add embellishments, sculptural, commemorative elements, and landscapes to the existing memorial. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Schuyler. We don't have our Senate representative. Do we have any indication whether the Senate would be taking up the Height Act?
Nothing yet. The Office of Planning had provided, or I'm sorry, the Mayor's office had provided some information earlier on, but it's really hard to say at this point.
Okay. Thank you for that report. Agenda item number 4A is the consent calendar. We have 2 items on the consent calendar, and they are the draft master plan for Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall at Fort McNair, and the second item is transfer of jurisdiction of a portion of Reservation 497, New Hampshire Avenue Northeast and South Dakota Avenue Northeast. Are there any questions from commissioners on any of the items on the consent calendar? Mr. May?
No question, but I wanted to make this comment. I just wanted to comment that I'm very pleased that we've now reached the point of having this transfer jurisdiction before the commission. We've been working with the district for a couple of years now on effecting this transfer, and it's been complicated. There have been neighbor concerns and that have been addressed, but in the end, I think the process has gone smoothly and slowly, and we're pleased that it's now before the commission.
Thank you, and thank you for all your work.
One other comment, please, Mr. Chairman. Also, I'm pleased to see the submission of the master plan. As we know, some of the DOD installations have been tardy, is the probably kindest thing I can say about submission of master plans, so it's nice to see this one, which covers a couple of the installations, both Meyer-Henderson Hall as well as Fort McNair. I was at a meeting yesterday at Belvoir, the Installation Planning Board, chaired by Major General Buchanan from the Military District, Washington, and I was assured that Belvoir, which at one time had more than 20 projects in the pipeline, they're about to submit their master plan for review, I believe, at the July meeting. So a couple of encouraging signs from the DOD community.
Good. And I would just follow up with Commissioner May's comment about the transfer of jurisdiction, just for the benefit of the public, that this is the transfer that will facilitate the location of a permanent memorial honoring the victims of and the first responders to the Metro Rail Red Line collision in June of 2009. May I entertain a motion? Is there a second? Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion was unanimously carried. Agenda item number 5A is the preliminary and final site and building plans for the building expansion at the Pentagon. Mr. Hart.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The Washington Headquarters Services has submitted a preliminary and final site and building plans for an expansion facility at the Pentagon. As you may recall, this project was submitted at our March meeting and was deferred, citing the need for more time so that the Washington Headquarters Services could address CFA and NCPC concerns. And they've now submitted the project for our review. Don't know what that was. Straight. Here is the site in its context. This expansion is being proposed adjacent to the Pentagon Transit Center, which is circled here in yellow. It is on the southeastern portion of the Pentagon. The Pentagon is a National Historic Landmark and designated in 1992. The nomination form lists 5 contributing elements for this designation: the distinctive 5-sided shape, the 5 facades, the center courtyard and its surrounding facade, as well as the terrace fronting the river entrance and the terrace fronting the mall entrances. And those entrances are here, this terrace, and then the terrace to the north. A closer view is shown here. The location of the new facility is circled in yellow. As was shown in the Pentagon, shown here is the Pentagon Transit Center, which has a number of bus bays, several sets of escalators and elevators. The escalators and elevators connect to the Pentagon Metro Rail Station, which is located directly below this area. This is a major transit center with many employees, commuters, and visitors moving through here on a daily basis. This project is the first part of 2 buildings being proposed at this entrance. The second building expansion will be proposed in FY 2017. Here is the existing conditions in plan form with the canopies removed. We see an existing temporary facility here in yellow, which the Commission approved back in 2011. The new project will replace this facility. Here are a few images of the area. The top left shows the site where the new facility will be located, and the bottom image shows a glass partition wall that WHS is working with WMATA to remove as part of this project. Next, we have the site for the proposed expansion facility. This facility will be positioned south of the existing metro entrance facility. And for your information, the north is actually kind of up in the upper, the direction is in the upper right-hand corner here. It will connect to the metro entrance facility with an interior connection. So back in January 2014, the Washington Headquarters Services submitted this design, and it's showing the new expansion building, which is to the on the other side of the metro canopy, and you also notice that glass wall that's located here as well at the top of the escalators, which go down to the metro entrance. This is now what's being proposed. There are a number of changes, and I'll show them in a upcoming slide. But again, it's in the same location as the previous submission, just has some architectural detail changes. So getting to the changes, the current design emphasizes the main entrance with a portion of it. The Washington Headquarters Services wanted to relate better to the building to the canopy, as well as the surroundings with the historic Pentagon building in the back. So they've emphasized the main entrance with a section that is higher in elevation and extended out from the building itself to give it that additional emphasis. The doors are now more clearly visible. They have added additional glazing for additional light, and they are proposing, as I said a little earlier, to remove this wall, and they're working with WMATA in order to do that. WMATA actually owns the wall as well as the land underneath it. And they've also they've changed the design of the windows. You'll see that there are sets of windows here, and this was the previous design on the upper the image on the upper portion of this slide. So they have made considerable changes or some significant changes to the design. And again, these were based on comments that both NTPC staff as well as CFA made over the last few months. This is an image just showing at the top of the escalators, showing what the entrance would look like. And again, these three kind of windows that you saw in the previous slide. During consultation, staff raised several concerns regarding the project. These concerns were the visitor experience and as well as transportation issues. Particularly the transportation issues were around getting more information about pedestrian counts and movement, as this is a major transportation hub. They have quite a number of people that move through here on a daily basis. Staff thinks that WHS has addressed the questions raised through this design given the project constraints. The proposed design makes a more easily identifiable entrance that is free from barriers. Staff notes that CFA has reviewed the project twice since February in its concept form, but has chosen not to vote on it. Through letters, and you'll see the letters in your ADR, the rear, the back of the EDR, they have noted, they've requested that the Washington Headquarters Services relocate the building to make it a more fitting entry that is symmetric and centrally located in order for it to be more welcoming to Pentagon visitors. In response, WHS notes that given the site security and cost constraints, that this is its preferred site. With regard to transportation, the Washington Headquarters Services has provided staff with additional information concerning the number and movement of pedestrians through the site, and now staff does not believe that this is a concern, that the flow will not be, there won't be any obstructions to flow during the, as this facility comes into development. And with that, the Executive Director's recommendation is that the Commission approve the preliminary and final site and building plans for the development of a building expansion at the Pentagon Reservation adjacent to the Pentagon Metro Station entrance. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, and the Washington Headquarters Services representatives are here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart, for that presentation. Does the Commission have any questions or comments, or someone want to make a motion?
So moved.
Been moved and properly seconded. Is there discussion? I had one question. Is the cherry blossoms that were trees that were pictured in the new design, are they there already, or are they just there to make it look pretty?
And will they be there?
Will they be there?
I'll just say that that Photoshop is a wonderful thing sometimes.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell where the trees would be placed.
I'll let them answer whether or not there's.
No, that's okay. It was really a rhetorical question.
Take that as, at this time, the answer is no. There's an ugly chain link fence that delineates a laydown area immediately adjacent to the site. The fence will come down, obviously, when the site is completed.
You can come forward and identify yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Bill Battle with WHS, Century Program Manager. There are crepe myrtles in the project, but they're not at that particular location, but they're in and around the facility. You'll see them.
Well, that will be helpful.
One small clarification, too. There was a couple of references to the glass wall that WMATA had installed, and we used the term remove. We may be able to relocate that, push it out a little bit farther. It does serve a functional purpose, and it defines the space a little bit, as well as serves as a windbreak for the rain and the wind coming up from the south. So it has some value. If we could just push it out a few feet, we're receptive to doing that.
Thank you. Mr. Hart?
Have we seen this as a preliminary design before?
No, we have not.
It bothers me
The
when,
April meeting.
Well, we
That was deferred.
Pulled from the
We-
consent calendar.
Yeah, it was pulled from the consent calendar, so it was submitted to us, but we deferred it at the time, and actually it was a March calendar that we.
it always concerns me when applicants come before the commission with preliminary and final. It assumes that we're going to go ahead and rubber stamp whatever they're presenting, because preliminary, in my mind, is a design that has some flexibility, is open to input by various agencies, including this commission. And to have an applicant come with preliminary and final design approval seems to presume that we really are simply going to approve it. It's offensive to me to think that we're not taken into account with more consideration than that. And what we're seeing, apparently CFA has some reservations with. And I share a lot of the reservations that CFA has articulated. So I wish that we would have more time before the design comes before us for final approval in order to have a useful exchange of ideas in the formulation of the final design.
Thank you. Further discussion? Commissioner May?
Yeah, I don't want to go into great detail, but I had raised concerns about this when we saw it in March. And while I have seen some improvement of the design of the actual facility, I am very much in agreement with concerns raised by the Commission of Fine Arts, and I don't believe that that the EDR goes far enough to call for changes. And so I think that essentially this needs to be re-examined on a more extensive level, and I think that I cannot support it as it is. Oh, and I also agree with Commissioner Hart's comments about seeing things at preliminary and final, particularly when they are particularly when they're troubling like this, and clearly not as fully and appropriately developed as they need to be.
Thank you, Commissioner May. Your points are well taken. Any further comments or discussion?
In response to some of the points made by fellow commissioners, we appreciate that feedback. There were several things that Mr. Hart commented on in his presentation, such as the many accommodations for NCPC and CFA requested design changes. Many of those have been captured formally in the documentation that has flowed back and forth. Echo the sentiments of some of the other commissioners about presenting preliminary and final. As my recollection is, we attempted to submit for preliminary approval at the 3 April meeting, and that was deferred, putting us in this position of having to submit for preliminary and final together at this time.
Okay, now
Thank
you've
you.
done it.
Commissioner Wright.
Okay, I was going to be quiet, but you can't say that because I'm troubled too. But this thing had no business being on the consent calendar. I don't know how it ended up there. If it had been mine and somebody at NCPC had said, we're going to put it on the consent calendar, I would have been going yee-haw too. So, but something tells me I wouldn't get the hall pass like that. I really I'm struggling with this too, because we're so inconsistent. We have a real backbone when it comes to some things, and we say thou shalt not, and we talk a lot about you better do your master plan, and we're not looking at you, we're not talking to you, and until this happens, and then on other things we just fold like a cheap suit, and I struggle with the whole idea of scale, who's going to see this, and is the function and the throughput and the massive numbers that you have to accommodate and all these things. I get all the practical problems, and yet, the design process moves slowly enough in the regular world. The civilian, I don't mean by that the civilian versus military world. I mean just in the private sector. Then you add government to that, and it slows it down in half. Then you add military to that, and I imagine that your job is not an easy one, Commissioner Pravancha. However, this application finds itself in the position that it does, not because it was booted off the consent calendar last month and now is here for preliminary and final. That's that's not the case. I can't figure out how much of a stink to make about this because I share the concerns which we've already talked about in the earlier session. Because it's this creep thing, right? It's like scope creep or what we all experience in our daily lives. And it doesn't, I guess, as a standalone screening facility, and why is it that these little tiny, carbuncles, whether they start out that way or end that way, are such vexing design problems? This is one. And I'm tempted to just say, I get it, and I know it's gonna happen anyway because we're so far along in the process, and let it go. Because, well, it's a carbuncle. And yet, what ends up happening in perimeter security, in the design of screening facilities, in these kind of ancillary to the big dance kind of projects, when we let ourselves say, oh, well, this time we're going to accept what we probably all agree is not our best effort, communally, then we are surrendering. And I don't know that we should, even if it's just symbolically not surrendering. Because then the next guy points to that and says, well, it was okay for the Pentagon, or it was okay for, the GSA building, so let's do it here. So I'm struggling with it because I know you're in a terrible position and you have to get this done. And yet, when do we say that ideals are important to maintain, and schedule and budget is something that we all have to not allow to drive the train? Because my job is exactly the same. So I understand it, and I don't know what to do. Somebody.
It is a painful position. It is a painful position to be in. I call it the Popeye syndrome. Remember that?
No.
Some of us are old enough.
Well-
I've had all I can stand. I can't stand no more. At the point that he would then
that.
eat his spinach and so forth. But I agree with you on several of your points. One was the placement of this last month on the consent calendar. I think the consent calendar decisions are made by the executive committee as to what goes on the calendar and what's consent and what's an action item and so forth. So just for explanation and clarification on that.
Thank you. Commissioner White?
I just have a question, because in our EDR, there was an approval of preliminary and final site and building plans back in 2010.
Yes.
And then in 2012, there was an approval of extension of approval for the temporary facility.
Yeah,
So
there were temporary facilities. Those approvals were for those temporary facilities. This is for a permanent facility that will replace it. So
weren't those issues addressed at the time? I mean, I appreciate the conversation around the aesthetics and the ideal, and I don't disagree with the ideal, but I just, on balance, that this is the Pentagon and the sheer volume of traffic and the security concerns that must be factored in, that I'm not, an expert in. I think on balance, I think this is a workable solution and support it.
Thank you.
I think your answer to part of that question is yes. In May of 2011, the Department of Defense notified the executive director formally that this functional solution for us was this facility on this carbuncle facility, using other folks' language, not ours, placement on the south side of the Metro Entrance facility since May of 2011.
That's
And
helpful.
discussion conceptually,
Before my time.
even prior to that.
Commissioner Dixon?
Mr. Chairman, I just would add that, first of all, I don't think there's a silver bullet answer to this design. And if someone has one, then they can bring on board an architect and a team of people to recommend it. But I think that at some point, you kind of have to do your best you can and move forward. And I think that there's a lot of improvements can be made, and think we could refine this, and probably if we wait long enough, there may be new technology that may give us a new building structure or new capacity. We can drill some holes, maybe, I don't know what may happen. But right now, I think we've kind of worked this through a lot, and there's some resistance to it, and I appreciate the comments. The other question I have is, this is designed to make it somewhat more accommodating to some people who get on the metro to go to the Pentagon or to go through this facility. Is that correct? It's visitors, okay, primarily. So the longer we delay this, the less accommodating their experience is going to be. So we just let them wait a while, let them not enjoy, let's let them, live with what they got until we decide we can come up with a building. But I'm not prepared to do that. I think we should do what we can to make their experiences as good as possible, as soon as possible. And I think that there's been a lot of effort to do that, I believe.
The point was made earlier about starting down the slippery slope, going in the wrong direction. I think that's an absolutely legitimate point. When you have a 5,000 square foot addition, $5.4 million, to a 6.344 million square foot facility that's been renovated at the cost of $4.529 billion, it's important to be as consistent as you possibly can. We struggled with this before. I can remember, it was June or July of 2011, the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, where they presented a concept that had visitors, I think, and employees screening separately, 2 different flows, and it was, so deja vu all over again in a different environment.
Thank you, Commissioner McCarthy. And by the way, we at the in my report of the chairman to the body, I did announce earlier that you have been designated as the mayor's first alternate, and we welcome you back to the commission.
Deja vu all over again. Yeah, I have somewhat conflicting emotions, having been through that visitors center, which isn't very attractive, in the middle of a sea of surface parking, which is also not very attractive. So looking at the backdrop, it's hard to say too many bad things. But on the other hand, it's such a relentlessly symmetrical building, and I see that both the staff and CFA had considered the issue of making symmetrical entrances really important in terms of being consistent with that. And you indicate in the report that you were satisfied with the response, which apparently CFA was not. What was the response? And it also kind of makes me curious, because if it were that many $1 billion worth of rehab work that was done, it would have been a good time to consider the visitor facilities being incorporated with that.
You can.
The response on the time, absolutely. If we had known about the heightened HSPD 12 requirements during the phasing of Wedge 5, it was completed and occupied in the May 2011 timeframe. So we didn't have, it missed the planning cycle. These are new, if you will, relatively new and more stringent that we're all having to comply with. That's one reason why the Pentagon Century program from the 10, 11 through 14, 15 timeframe was developed to address those new security requirements. So again, part of it is scope too. The scope for the Pentagon renovation was on the interior of the building. It was nothing on the exterior. We've invested, we got a 29-acre roof. We've invested more than $40 million to date. It was nothing about the roads and infrastructure, utilities. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in out-year requirements around the reservation, well outside the scope of the Pentagon renovation project itself.
So when you were unaware of the enhanced standards and doing the interior renovation, you were just assuming that you were going to keep that temporary visitors facility?
Until the permanent. The temporary that was approved by NCPC in 2010 and then subsequently extended, yes. So we have an interim, we call it, in the Air Force design arena, we would call it austere but adequate temporary screening facility. That's what we're trying to replace and upgrade.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my original question, though, was what was the justification as to why it couldn't be symmetrical?
There were just certain constraints, site security and
Capacity,
constraints
throughput.
that just made this, I guess we understood that this was preferable and understood that that was a necessity, that they needed to do that.
Accessibility to the folks that it primarily serves. multiple reasons.
So therefore, if we were to table and ask for an additional month of consultation and work on revising the design or whatever, it would not, your judgment is that it would not lead to an improvement?
An improvement, what type of improvement? I mean, they have gone through some, this was on our March agenda, and at that point, there were some concerns that were raised, and they have addressed the concerns. And it doesn't seem like there will be changes after this point. So this would be the end of this process.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's what I was asking is, clearly you raised some additional concerns after that. They made some adjustments and enhancements, and so your feeling is, or multiple adjustments and enhancements, and your feeling is not just that you ran out of time by the time you needed to bring it here, and therefore didn't have further discussion, but that there were likely, given the constraints of throughput and the location of the entrance, the symmetry seems to be the biggest objection.
Yeah.
There
Wouldn't be a change to it.
Okay, thank you.
Other than redesigning it and relocating it, we could proceed.
Okay, thank you. I would just note that, from my perspective, the permanent screening facility is certainly better than the temporary one that's been there, and the revised design is again better than the previous design. There have been some improvements to it, and just following up on the carbuncle comment. You can't ignore the 4,000 cars that are adjacent to that carbuncle in the surface parking lot. And you can't putting a carbuncle in the surface parking lot. It kind of goes together. If we're going to be aspirational, though, someday it'd be nice to have all those cars underground, so that there can be a better environmental solution to that whole campus. So I would just add that. Is there any further discussion? Yes.
Just had a question. So along the lines of the recommendation about in the future, the second portion in 2017, making that symmetrical, that's part of the EDR recommendation. On page 8 of the EDR, it says WHS states that it's amenable to exploring that option. I was just curious, like the likelihood of that happening.
I'll leave that to WHS to answer.
We will consider, there would be a third piece, because you'd have the first element, which would be the visitor screening facility, and the second element would be the employee screening facility in the center. We would consider looking at placing a structure that's symmetrical to the visitor screening facility that we're proposing in the future.
I guess I'm just curious about, so you will consider it, but like, is it likely to happen, or?
I can't speak to the likelihood of that right now, because we're still palming for FY17 to get the employee entrance in. So after that, we would look at what we would palm for beyond FY17.
Okay, thank you. Unless there's further discussion, I would call for the vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Me too. Can't do it. I'm sorry.
So 2 opposed. Madam Secretary, you got the vote. The motion carries. Thank you all for your presentation. And thank everyone for their full discussion of the item. Agenda item number 6A is an information presentation on the Anacostia streetcar line. Mr. Hart, you're on again.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman again, and members of the Commission. We have the District Department of Transportation representatives here today to provide us with an update on one of the segments of the 22-mile priority transit system that you learned about, I guess it was 2 months ago now, or 3 months ago, when we visited in February of this year. As DDOT continues its process of evaluating the streetcar system in the future, DDOT staff will periodically come to NCPC to update the Commission on what's happening with with that portion of the system. I'll note that in June of this year, actually next month, DDOT will return to give another information presentation on the north-south line in light of all, for our information as well. And the north-south line, as you remember from our February meeting, is an alignment that starts from Buzzard Point and continues through the National Mall and travels north up towards the Tacoma Station area. The Anacostia initial line, which we're hearing an extension from, the initial line was approved back by the Commission back in 2007, and today is nearly constructed. You may recall that we saw some of that on our tour. DDOT is here today to talk about an extension of that line northward from the Anacostia Metro Station north through historic Anacostia towards the 11th Street Bridge. This segment will actually not go over the bridge, the new 11th Street Bridge, but will come to it. And with that introduction, I'd like to ask Circe, who's standing here, from DDOT to come to give us the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good afternoon. My name is Circe Torruellas. I work with the DC Department of Transportation in the transit team. I've been working on this project, taking it to the National Environmental NEPA process now for about 3 years. Been working closely with various staff here at NCPC and consulting with them. And we've been before the board a couple of times too to provide some feedback and information on the project. This project basically has, Mr. Hart has mentioned, it's an extension to the initial line that you guys visited when you went on your tour. It's meant to serve the historic district, the historic downtown of Anacostia, where a lot of the commercial activity and some schools and other government services are kind of situated. When we began the project, we went out to the community as well as agencies to share kind of the purpose and the vision of making this connection. Doing that, we identified 10 different ways in which that connection could be made, and went through several levels of screening, looking at various impacts or the feasibility of the various alternatives that were proposed. And we narrowed it down to 4 alternatives that really looked at impacts in terms of traffic and congestion that were somewhat feasible, noise and vibration impacts. And we narrowed that down to 2. And I'm going to walk you a little bit through that. That's kind of a summary of the process. And just to kind of refresh folks' memories that were somewhat familiar with the project, and for those that this is new information. The purpose of the proposed action was to build and operate and maintain an efficient, reliable, and convenient extension of the existing initial line to enhance the connectivity between the Anacostia neighborhood and the rest of the district neighborhoods, and support community revitalization along that corridor of MLK, Martin Luther King Avenue. The need was similar to kind of the overall purpose of the streetcar, but more specifically to this particular area of the city, was to support sustainable land uses and some of the community needs that have been raised by residents to try to accommodate better the increase in population growth that's happening in Southeast Washington, promote the local economic revitalization of their historic district. This is a disadvantaged neighborhood in the district, so they want to foster more economic activity as well as support sustainable goals in the community. From the transit network perspective, we wanted to improve the connectivity. There's a lot of transit-dependent individuals in this area of the city, and so a lot of it is supported by the bus network right now, as well as some of the metro stations. So we wanted to enhance and bring additional transit services to the community, and also increase capacity, as I just mentioned. a lot of people that live and work in this area depend on transit. So we need to increase the capacity of our network to be able to accommodate the different riders. Through the environmental process, we also, because this was situated in a historic area of the city, we initiated a Section 106 evaluation for historic and cultural resources, working very closely with our the SHPO office here, the State Historic Preservation Office, and consulted with them and with interested parties, which included NCPC, or part of the consulting parties. We completed the assessment, and to kind of summarize, we recommended expanding the boundaries of the historic district to include the two properties. One, I think I can't point it, but they're kind of in the south side of the historic district. One is the Thurgood Marshall Academy right now, the Old Bernie School and Nichols School. They're in the south, and the other property, it's the the former police station, which is a little bit north of the school. They're in yellow right here. Okay, great. Thank you. We found no adverse effects to the historic properties, but the SHPO as well as NCPC requested in the design and construction process, to continue to work with DDOT to ensure that there were no visual impacts, because right now the district, although it's still searching for alternative propulsion that will be wireless, we're still working through what the timing of that will be. And so for this particular line, there's still plans to include overhead wires. So we met with the consulting parties on May 2nd and received comments, and kind of concluded that process along with this overall NEPA document. Okay, so that's kind of, oh, here we go. There's the two pictures of the buildings. As part of the study process, we also looked at the various improvements that were happening. There's a lot of different activity that's happening in this area of town. There was the reconstruction of the 11th Street Bridge, the improvements that are ongoing to the South Capitol Street roadways, as well as the future reconstruction of the bridge, which will be kicking off very soon. We were also looking, although it's outside of the immediate project boundaries, the improvements that were happening at San Elizabeth, and a lot of the improvements associated with the GSA coming in and in our roadways. We also looked at our project, as well as a lot of the Metro bus activities, in particular improvements that Metro study to improve access to their Metro station at the Anacostia Green Line Metro Station. So as I mentioned before, we went through a screening process for those initial 10 alternatives. We looked at land use, environmental issues, population needs, benefits to the riders, as well as economic development, traffic and transit operations in the corridor, costs, and then community support. And that one very fast. So this is kind of a summary of the 10 alternatives that were looked at. 3 on the east side of the Martin Luther King corridor, 3 on the west side of the Martin Luther King corridor, and then 4 that were kind of outside of the what we will call the main business district, but not so far away from it, but just not on MLK. And so from those 10, we went down to the 4 alternatives that were evaluated and went through the NEPA process. So I think a lot of you are familiar with the National Environmental Protection Act. We looked at initially all the natural resources, cultural resources, that were in the affected area, how socioeconomic resources, transportation, noise, and vibration affected each alternative, as well as hazardous waste materials. Some of this, particularly one alternative, the alternative 9, it's on CSX right away. So we looked at some of that activity, and all of this it's in the document that it's available for the public. Energy conservation opportunities. We looked at 4F impacts to parkland and other historic buildings. National Park Service, it's north of kind of the project area, and we consulted with National Park Service during this process too. And lastly, we looked at which are 3 of the main concerns that a lot of the public as well as some of the agencies had, which was visual and aesthetic conditions impacts, safety and security, and then construction impacts. Out of the 4 alternatives that I mentioned, the first one that was illuminated was alternative 2. This kind of summarizes some of the considerations, but as you see, this alternative will have started at the Anacostia Metro Station along Howard Road, will have turned left on Martin Luther King Avenue going north, and then right on W Street, then left on 13th Street, left on Good Hope, and then made all its way back to the Anacostia Metro Station along MLK, creating a loop. The main concerns happen when we turn on W Street and then on 13th Street, because we were more close to residential properties, and there were a little bit more impacts to vibration and noise impacts for the residents. So it wasn't that those issues could not be mitigated. They could be mitigated, but there were still impacts to them that were negative in their perception. So it also will have to have impacted the historic district, because it will have been in the historic district. So additional coordination with the SHPO will have had to take place. So looking at all those impacts compared to the other 3 that we have, we decided to move forward and kind of drop this one from consideration. So from the 4 alternatives, we went down to 3, alternative 4 and alternative 5, which were somewhat similar, and then alternative 9. And we did a little bit more of conceptual engineering, and here we started looking at more of the impacts with the operations of the streetcar. And the red dots that you see, those are what we will call corner clips, which are impacts to the sidewalk. It doesn't mean that we could not, again, mitigate around that and build a sidewalk in a way that will accommodate the operations, but that will also involve a bit more of a looking at eliminating parking and other amenities that are there now. So we looked at that for alternative 4 and alternative 5, as well as alternative 9, and concluded that looking at alternative 5, there were a little bit more complicated turning movements that were happening. Let me go a little bit back here. We will have to kind of navigate the turning movements on W Street as well as U Street, which are, if you haven't been back there, it's very, very narrow. It's very kind of short turns, as well as we will have a little bit more corner clips to also try to address, and again, a very narrow space. So with that, we added additional displacement of parking as well as impacts to loading zones. A lot of the activity right now that's taking place along that stretch of the loop, it's industrial. So with that, we decided to also drop alternative 5 from the review process and just kind of focus on the 2 most feasible that we found at this point, which were 4 and 9. In all of this, as you know, we also looked at no-bill alternative. That's always part of a NEPA process. In looking at the pros and cons of all three alternatives with the no-bill, we saw as a pro that not having streetcar will not deteriorate additional traffic conditions, which are pretty negative because of all the activity that's happening right now in that area of the city, as well as there won't be any investment of streetcar, both capital operating, not bringing this additional amenity to the community. In terms of, oh, sorry, that was pro. So in terms of cons, we looked at not having streetcar as economic catalyst for revitalization in the neighborhood, and not having it meet the main goals of the project, which is additional connectivity to the transit network and to the streetcar network in the future. This is might be a little bit hard to read, but looking at the bill alternatives, we start comparing both what the constraints and opportunities were for each, and we focus specifically on intersection impacts, corner clips, as I mentioned before, parking impacts, which are a big concern in the community, as well as impacts to loading zones, which was always a concern too for the businesses, the historic properties, also ridership potential and capital costs associated with the build out of either alternative. These two alternatives and the no build were summarized in the NEPA document that was released on March 18 till April 18, which NCPC as well as other agencies completed their review process and their comments. This is a summary, kind of a conclusion of the difference between both. Again, not one it's better than the other, but in terms of providing the connection, but one it's a little bit, the community has shown a little bit more support towards alternative 9. And that alternative, it's the one on the CSX right-of-way. Some of the comments that we heard, it's a faster route for them to connect to the metro station coming from the Good Hope MLK area, as well as W Street and MLK, which is where a lot of the activity is happening. It's less accessible for them in terms of in the short term, and that it's meant related to improvements to the sidewalks and the right-of-ways that will provide the access to it. As part of our of this project, we were going to be looking at doing some of those sidewalks improvements and lighting and reconstruction of streets to enhance that connection. It does have lower capital costs, but we're still negotiating with CSX in the acquisition of that right-of-way. We don't own it yet. And with streetcar, a lot of what the thinking has been from various agencies, Office of Planning, I think NCPC has also shared some thoughts about this, is that in the future there's thoughts of the redevelopment of Power Point, which will be north to this alignment in particular. And so with streetcar, we have to think about what the future potential is to capture opportunity with adding the transit. So alternative 9 provides that opportunity. Alternative 4, it's also one that some folks also show some favor towards. The main reason was because it goes through the current activity center, which is Martin Luther King Avenue, and so they believe that that can capture more ridership and some of the redevelopment that's happening there right now. It does have a little bit more of a complicated alignment. As you saw, you kind of go through some of the neighborhood streets. There is extensive traffic and parking impacts compared to 9. There's about 87 parkings that will be eliminated or will have to be replaced in some way. And it does have a higher capital cost. So, where we are right now, as I mentioned, we had the document out. We received 121 comments from about 41 commenters. You guys were some of the comments that we received. We're in the process right now of finalizing the review of all the comments and then submitting the comments and our formal recommendation to the Federal Transit Administration as well as the Federal Highway Administrations, who are the joint leads in the document. We expect, so it's kind of a summary of the comments, sorry. We expect the comments to be sent to FTA in the next week or so, and then they'll go into their review, which is normally 30 to 60 days until we hear back from them on whether to proceed with our recommendation or if we have to go back and do additional research or bump it to an EIS, which I'm hoping that doesn't happen if it's not necessary. But from the public comments, just wanted to give you kind of a taste of what we heard from the community. There are a lot of concerns about just safety with pedestrians, especially children and seniors, traffic impacts, access to the riders and the businesses to the amenity of streetcar, how that will look like, the purchasing of the CSX right away, as well as the visual impacts with the overhead wires. I think, have I run out of my time? Oh, no, okay. You were finishing up, sorry. Yeah, I was finishing up, okay. So we expect to have a decision by June, late June, beginning of July, and then we'll hope to come back and share with you guys what that is. We'll definitely share with Carlton and Mike Sherman, who have been our contacts with the project. So, thank you. Now I can open it up for questions or.
Thank you very much for that presentation, and thank the district department. We appreciated the tour that was given of the Anacostia streetcar yard and barn back in February. That was very helpful. Opening up to the commission, Commissioner Dixon, who lives near this place.
I was going to say that map is a great map of my neighborhood, and my house is like in the middle of it. So I don't want you to think it's first a community concern, but also a very personal concern. I'd like to do just, and this group has been very good about presenting to us. In fact, this young lady and her staff presented almost the same thing to the Anacostia Coordinating Council yesterday. So actually 2 times is better for me, so I guess that's good. I want at one point in your slides, you mentioned one of the pros and cons, and you have traffic as a pro, I think, for doing it. The traffic issue really is more for the alternate we like is a con because it's there's a lot of traffic.
I misspoke in that slide.
Exactly.
It was like, yeah.
Let me tell you where I am to start with. First of all, this has been before the community a lot, and it is, I think, overwhelmingly clear that the community initially, when it was presented, and now supports the CSX alternate 9, or option 9. We understand that there's negotiations going on, and hopefully we won't hurt that negotiations by being clear where we would like it to go. And the reasons we feel that way, first of all, if you look at 4, the other option, you'll notice there's a lot of trolleys within the community. Shannon Place, Emma, all those come with cables over the streets. So the more you put that in the community, the more the cable impact will be seen and felt. And obviously with CSX, that is not as big a concern. Hopefully technology will eliminate it altogether at some point, but that's the future. The other thing about the option 9 versus 4 in this case is that the economic development that we hope will be brought based upon trolley transit presence is to encourage where we have development going on now is a good idea. But if we move it to the 9 on the CSX, we will shift that encouragement over, even more encouragement, to new space and new property. So that's another. We think that it gives us greater encouragement. of in fact, economic development. Who is going to make the decision on this? We're advisory, but what body, what person, who makes this decision?
So DDOT will
DDOT,
make,
DC.
DC will make the recommendation to the Federal Transit Administration as well as the Federal Highway Administration. Federal
Right.
Highways is involved for the streetscape improvements
Right.
Associated with the project. And then they will do kind of the final determination whether to proceed with our recommendation or if they want us to go back and
Yes.
do additional analysis.
Okay, I want to also mention that I have the privilege of being around and living when we had trolleys on MLK. Then it was Nicholas Avenue. I rode those things, those tracks that they, so this concept that this is a permanent thing that developers can get excited about and join and develop because of it, these things come and go, as those did. And these could go, too. I'd much prefer to see them go with the cables over the CSX line than to have them put it all in our neighborhood and all of a sudden they go away. I also had the benefit, I worked with Bechtel and some other companies to help the Portland and some other projects that did this. So I'm fully aware of, my company does that kind of CAD work and stuff for people. So I understand the hope and the possibility, and a very strong one, that this will encourage economic development along its lines. But I think the same thing can occur if we were on the 9 with CSX than the other option. So I'm actually making a case and letting my colleagues know that there is a pretty strong position in the community that will benefit us. And I know with their minds and the creativity that's on this panel, they can probably also see reasons why one option may be stronger than the other one. And I think they would clearly look at 9 themselves. And I don't know where this will go, but the more we get to support that direction, the better we're going to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Dixon. Further comments, questions, Commissioner May?
Thank you. You did mention the Park Service have been consulted in this process, and we didn't have a whole lot, I think, in the way of comments or concerns that were directly expressed with regard to this line. But I'm not just worrying the Park Service have.
They were consulted and they had an interest in the beginning of the project because during looking at the 10 different alternatives, a lot of folks wanted to connect to the park, and so probably 3 out of the 10 alternatives were looping around the park. We can go back to that slide. So we had to consult with them. So if you look at basically alternative 7 had it completely on that side of the
Right.
park outside of Anacostia, which didn't meet the project goals. Then we had 8 and 10, which were 2 loops. Number 10 was proposed by the I think Office of Planning when thinking of what it will look like with PowerPoint. Again, 10 didn't meet the immediate project goals, but National Park Service too was a little bit resistant. They kind of said, no, we don't want this in the park either. So
Okay. Well, and I mean, in the long run, of course, that land is been
Expected
directed
to become- yeah,
we've been
to
directed
the
by the
district.
Congress to transfer to the district once
Correct.
we've completed the NEPA process for that, which I believe is going to get started again shortly. So I mean, and all things considered, I don't think there are huge concerns that we have directly about alternative 4 versus alternative 9. I do have a question though about alternative 4. I mean, have you studied how much traffic impact alternative 4 will actually have on Martin Luther King
Yes.
Avenue? Because I mean, just about any time of day, you can run into really slow traffic and failing intersections.
It will make it worse.
will-
It's already bad, so
So,
it will make it a little bit worse.
Okay,
So it's not an
a
improvement.
little bit worse. So you've done a study and analyzed the intersections, and you've got intersections that are probably Ds and Es now going to Fs?
Yeah.
I mean, is that what it is? Okay.
Certain
So,
sections of it.
For those of you who don't speak traffic study, apparently anything other than an F is okay. But there are grades of F. I mean, there's an F that's this bad, and then there's an F that's this bad.
But
So-
normally in urban environments,
What's that?
in urban environments, it tends to be C, Ds, and E's and F's. So yeah.
Right. I'm very, very familiar. Mr. Henson in the audience tutors us on traffic studies all the time at the zoning.
Yeah.
At the zoning commission. Do I need to repeat that? Never mind.
Yeah, so alternative
let's
9,
leave it at
obviously it's in its own right of way, so there's no
Right.
traffic impacts. It's still, the traffic conditions still will stay F in certain sections, but it won't be worse
So,
because of streetcar compared to 4.
okay, so in studying this, I know that there's an absolutely massive plan unit development that's in process, and I think they've gotten a stage 1 approval for the Curtis Brothers properties. I'm not sure exactly what it's called right now, but it's that cluster of properties that are kind of underdeveloped.
They're kind of in that loop.
So the traffic study considered the future traffic conditions, including all of that?
Correct.
Okay. And can you characterize the nature of the issues with the CSX acquisition at this point? I mean, I know it's hard to work with CSX. You know, you ask them for a meeting, and after about 6 months, they'll say yes or no, they want a meeting, and then after 6 or 8 months, you'll actually get it on somebody's schedule. And I mean, I know how difficult they can be, but I mean, where are you now in that process?
I have Thomas Perry, who's the engineer, who's involved in that here, so he can share a little bit more about that.
Hi, Thomas Perry, Program Manager for Engineering and Construction for Streetcar. Good to see a lot of you guys. I recognize you from the tour. To answer your question, as you know, there have been a lot of changes at DDOT, both with our Chief Engineer and also our Director, Telly Beverly, who today is his last day, and we actually are going to try to get to his luncheon. But but with that, right now we are nearing the final stages with CSX, so we are also having some transition with the leadership. And basically, we're still negotiating with them, and we hope to close those negotiations soon. So,
But you're optimistic that you could actually
oh yes,
pull it
yes,
off? Okay.
very optimistic and excited. We
All right.
just got to keep moving and then sign the dotted line.
Okay, good. Well, I'll try to keep my comments short so you can get back to to Terry's party and extend our good wishes. I was invited to come as well, and unfortunately, I can't get there.
And everybody's here. You're welcome to come on.
So I guess the only other question I had was that on the overhead wires, that I have to agree wholeheartedly with Commissioner Dixon that the impact of overhead wires along Martin Luther King Boulevard would be absolutely awful. And the CSX alignment makes a whole lot more sense from that perspective. I mean, this is one of the most troubling things about the overhead wires, or about the streetcar lines generally across the city, because while some people have seen what's been done at H Street and are not deeply troubled by it, I absolutely was. And it's not just a concern about the L'Enfant City, and it's not just a concern about important, quote, important view sheds like the mall. It is an issue across the city, and it's exactly why there was an act of Congress in whatever it was, 1890-something, to ban overhead wires. And I think it would be an absolute shame if we wind up in a situation where the wires are running through Old Town and Anacostia. I just think that would be a terrible result.
Thank you. Are there any further comments, Commissioner McCarthy, please?
I'm sorry for coming late to the party, and it sounds like your tour was really valuable. First is kind of an NCPC question. I'm confused because the piece of paper that we have in our folder is talking about the extension between Joint Base Anacostia Bowling and the Anacostia Metro Station.
Oh, no, this is the north. The south part that was actually approved already. So it's The Anacostia line is one line. There's a northern portion, there's a southern portion. This is just the northern portion. The southern portion is already through us. It's been approved by us already.
Okay, okay, because it seemed like this was reading more about that, but okay. So I would just say, if I were writing about that, I wouldn't necessarily say this extension which begins at the entrance to JBAB and terminates near the Anacostia Metro, which
Oh, yeah, no, that's.
sort of
if it
implies
does,
an order of, you know, it's a connection between, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. But with regard to these, I think it would be much more helpful for understanding the impact of Alignment 9 if one had on the picture all of the projects that are proposed, from the redevelopment of Berry Farm to the 4 Points project to the Big K, because, you know, initially when I heard about going on the CSX right-of-way, my thought was, well, Anacostia is an area that has requested, wants to see more retail development. And normally, retail that only is on one side of the street, it's not, doesn't bode well for the quality of the retail. So we can't really put it on the other side of the street, or the other side of the streetcar. So it's sort of, it's got to be everything only on one side of that. On the other hand, knowing MLK and how difficult that is to navigate, as Commissioner Dixon says, almost any time of the day or night, or as Commissioner May said, I can understand putting it on there. But I think it becomes more understandable if you could see it in light of where the, you know, where the city has land that it expects to redevelop.
And it's not in this presentation, but I mean, we can share. We have the document, which it's still posted online, and there's a map with everything that you're saying that shows a lot of the projects that are there.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just not in the presentation. But
and that, in terms of the negative aspects of 4, the other thing that struck me is there are a lot of proposals for redevelopment, including redevelopment along MLK, and in the concerns that were raised about turning movements and others, there wasn't the possibility, as those properties redevelop, to widen or take the, I know one of the big issues has been removing on-street parking in order to accommodate the metro, but there weren't any possibilities of creating either off-street parking facilities or something so that you could continue to run MLK down what is sort of the traditional main street.
yeah, so I mean, we have to look at what's existing. So the existing conditions, if we were to put the streetcar right now, it will eliminate 87 existing parking spaces. The city can make a decision that they will replace those parking spaces in another manner. And that could be, you know, creating a parking lot, or they can make a policy decision that, you know, we're only going to replace X number and we're going to make this area more transit accessible, so we're not going to input, you know, more parking. So
Right,
in the document, we have to present what the impacts are with what is there now. And so that's kind of what we did.
Well, you have to present what impacts are there now, but you're presenting a bunch of alternatives for changes. So
Correct.
Wouldn't it be appropriate, if you're looking to get comment back from a reviewer, from the public or from other reviewers, wouldn't it be a good idea to make some commitments and say, you know, well, for example, we do 4, but if we do 4, we would commit to X, Y, and Z because we understand that there are negative impacts which would need to be mitigated.
Correct. And no, I hear what you're saying, but we have to basically review all the comments, which we are in the process of doing that now, to understand what the mitigation would be. For some of it, we have, you know, noise and vibration. We know what the technology is out there to make things vibrate less with the streetcar, you know. So and that was a concern with parking. We hear what the community is saying. If alternative 4 was to move forward, then the city, meaning my superiors, need to make a policy decision on what they want to do now. not all communities in the district are, if we remove parking, we necessarily put back the same amount of parking. So that will need to be evaluated here. Or if alternative 9 moves forward, then that's not an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there further comments or questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Francha?
This appears to be a very exciting project for those of us that are in the millennial age group and don't remember the previous streetcars. It's very exciting for that. The couple of takeaways that I recall from the trip on February was the wonderful maintenance yard, the job opportunities that are available. On the issue of wires, having experience in some other areas with large, heavy, bulky wires, large, heavy, bulky, obtrusive support structures, this seemed to be very light. It seemed to be a reasonable, ideally underground would be optimal, but if it just doesn't work in some areas. Was very impressed with the economic revitalization and development planning and analysis that's gone on. I would hope that along both routes, maybe right down to the linear foot, how many offices, or business functions versus housing. The only thing I would be concerned about is if these two routes would be analyzed and compared and contrasted, right down to the level of if there, it doesn't matter which route, if current housing would perhaps in the future be rezoned for business, while might be good for the economy, it's bad for the residents. So it's really difficult to meet that sweet spot that balances both. It's a vibrant community. Hopefully, many of those characteristics could be maintained, and that analysis could go down to that level. But very, very exciting project, and we very much appreciate the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further final questions or?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Just one really a final note. The District Department of Transportation will be submitting they're calling it the Maintenance and Operations Facility, or the MOF for Anacostia, in the next 2 months for our review. So we will be seeing that fairly shortly.
Okay, great. Before DDOT goes, let me just, I don't want to delay this, but can you give us a 30-second or 1 minute update on what's happening on H Street, when that might be
Thomas
running?
Perry will come back up. Yeah.
All right, so right now we are in testing. You see us out there. We're in what we call construction phase testing. So essentially, it's been revealing those issues that we either need to redefine, re-implement, or repair. So basically, as we find issues, we go back and repair those issues. So we're in that phase, which is going to set us up to move to systems integration, which is the precursor for pre-operations and on to revenue service. So I say all that to say I hesitate to necessarily give a date. It's an iterative process, and the other key piece we have is the temporary structure that we're going to be using to maintain the cars until we can move forward with the permanent facility, which is currently going to be in review with Historic, and we'll be bringing back to you guys. So.
Thank you. Yes.
I know you can't give a date, but do you have like a range?
Basically, definitely 2014, without a doubt.
For service?
For service, yes. And that's the best I can give right now.
Thank you.
So, thanks.
Thank you. Our final agenda item today is an information presentation on the United States Naval Observatory Lighting Study. Mr. Weil.
Bring that up. Great. It's 7553. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce Janelle Herring, who serves as the Community Planning Liaison Officer with Naval Support Activity Washington. She's here to provide the Commission with a briefing on the Naval Observatory Lighting Study, which concluded in May 2012. There should actually be a green brochure at each of your seats that summarizes the study and its recommendations, as well as a white brochure that gives a little history and background for the Naval Observatory as an installation. The study serves as a comprehensive lighting analysis designed to preserve the installation's mission related to its operation of 2 on-site observatories and to protect the Vice President's house. This lighting study is recognized in the final installation master plan, which was recently approved by the Commission this past March. And so with that, I'll turn the floor over to Janelle, who will describe the study in a little greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon. As Michael said, my name is Janelle Herring. I'm the Community Planning Liaison Officer for Naval Support Activity Washington. NSA Washington covers all the Navy installations in the DC metro area, including Carter Rock, Observatory, Arlington, Nimick, Navy Yard. My job is to help prevent the loss of the Navy's mission due to encroachment. So you might be wondering why this is significant and why it's important to you. And I would say, to answer that as a regulatory agency, NCPC has the ability to influence the federal properties in the area. Also, it comes down to economics, too. There's a cost for the loss or relocation of the observatory's mission and the loss of jobs that might come with that. First, I want to give you a quick overview of the lighting issues, and to that effect, I want to give you 3 takeaways up front. Maybe. There we go. 3 main points I want you to walk away with today is that light pollution is impacting the mission of the United States Naval Observatory, that the mission here is critical, and that light pollution can be reserved and the mission can be preserved here. On point number 1, light pollution impacts. For years, we've known that the scientists have been reporting that there is a degradation of their mission, their ability to view the stars due to urban light pollution. That's why NAVFAC undertook the study. It's also why in 1955, most of the observation mission was moved out to Flagstaff, Arizona. The 40-inch telescope could no longer operate under the urban conditions here. I think this shows a little bit better the impacts. This is the dome on Building 2 of the Naval Observatory, and you can actually see shadows of the trees from light fixtures that are located off the installation. This is a view to the north. You can see the National Cathedral and the uplighting that contributes to overall sky glow. This looks like a picture of a nice sunset, but this is actually the DC sky on a hazy night. I can't see very many stars through that. And here is the telescope with the urban sky glow in the background. So you can see the impacts of light pollution yourself. So I first want to talk about that point on the mission is critical. And the Naval Observatory here in DC is the location of the observatory's 26-inch telescope. That telescope measures double stars. And it's very technical from here, but I'm going to skip all of that I don't understand and go straight to the fact that the data that they get from that is used in the targeting solutions for strategic weapon systems. That should mean something because that's very important for DoD. It's also very important, the mission is critical here because the observatory is the location of the master clock. 2:29, the current time, that basically comes from the Naval Observatory. It's distributed, that information is distributed both to DoD and through the civilian network. There's another thing at the observatory called the VBLI correlator, and it produces Earth orientation products. Basically, the bottom line is that's your GPS. So DoD also uses that, and you use it when you turn on your phone and look to see where you are or where that restaurant is that you're trying to get to. Why can't these functions be moved to Flagstaff with the rest of the observatory that was moved out there? Well, the 26-inch telescope has been continuously operating here with the data since 1883, when it was moved up from Foggy Bottom. The amount of data that would need to be recalibrated and the reference point that has been a known for 150, almost 150 years would change. And it's just an overwhelming undertaking and adds an unknown to a not quite known issue as it is. So the longer they have the data, the longer they're in the same place, the longer they collect more data, the better the data is. The infrastructure costs for moving the other pieces, the master clock and the VBLI correlator, first of all, the infrastructure for those facilities, it would just be cost prohibitive to move them. And again, the master clock, it's sensitive to vibration, so moving it would impact it. The longer it stays in one place, the better accurate it is. And I think we're down to 1/1000th of a nanosecond on accuracy, which means every 300 and somewhere around 26 years, you have to change your clock for 1 second. So you might want to take a note on that. Okay, so here is an overview of the Naval Observatory. To orient you, there's Wisconsin Avenue on the bottom, and Massachusetts Avenue runs along the top side. Building 2 and Building 39 are where the 2 telescopes are located. The orange area is our primary viewing area for 75% of the viewing that the observatory does. And the yellow area indicated below that is the greatest potential for impacts to lighting. Sorry, I'm just not. Okay. So the need for controlling urban lighting was identified, and over 20 years ago, the need to protect the Navy's mission here was recognized, and an overlay district was created. That's shown there in yellow. It includes height limits so that it didn't obscure the viewing area. However, there are no lighting restrictions included in that zoning overlay. And unfortunately, if you compare that with the map I just showed you on the last page, it does not cover the primary viewing area. Bottom line here is that modifications to the zoning are needed. I want to talk to you a little bit about the study we undertook so you understand some of the information. Basically, the study was taken so that we would better understand the causes of the impacts to our mission. It was a multi-agency effort. We had DC, CFA, NCPC. I have a list of the different agencies. Secret Service was involved as they have taken over a portion of the Naval Observatory and are claiming it as their own for now. And really the goal was to recommend viable solutions to regulatory agencies like DC, like NCPC, so that we can get some changes enacted. NCPC, I'm sorry, the energy efficiency piece was a big concern for DDOT and DDOE. Security requirements were a big concern for the Secret Service. Since there's very many technical issues associated with lighting, I'm going to give you a brief overlay of the lighting principles. And basically, we're just going to constrain most of our conversation on the lighting sources to the 4 major types of lighting fixtures. So first of all, white light. You're going to go back to high school for a couple minutes, but white light includes colors from across the spectrum. Lighting sources have produced 2 different kinds, one of 2 different kinds of light. And first one is band light, and that is basically low pressure sodium. It produces light in the yellow spectrum, and you can see that on the top chart there. The light that's produced is all yellows or oranges. The other option is broad spectrum, and broad spectrum is a little bit of different colors throughout the lighting spectrum. You'll see down there, white light, LED. LED is broad spectrum. Again, Tying it back to the observatory, the scientists at the Naval Observatory have filters that they are able to use, and they can filter out most of the yellow and orange light. They cannot filter out broad spectrum lighting sources. So LEDs, high pressure sodium and fluorescent lighting cause problems for the scientists. To continue with the lighting principles, lamp light is another consideration. This is generally how long a bulb or a fixture lasts. It ties back to economics, replacement costs, man hours to do so. Point 3, color rendering index. This is important. Coloring rendering index is the ability to see colors accurately at night. If you are using low pressure sodium, you're only putting out yellow light. Thus, only colors that have yellow in them will be reflected. Reds, blues, purples, they don't have yellow, they don't reflect yellow, so they all turn out to look black or a shade of black, and you can't tell the difference between red, blue, purple, dark greens. And that is particularly of concern to security elements. They like to see details, like the color of vehicles, the color of skin, what somebody's got. And the fourth lighting principle is lighting efficiency. This is basically your energy efficiency. Lighting efficiency is how much light you get out of the fixture compared to how much energy you're putting in. Ties back to dollars and sustainability. You can see on this chart in the corner that low pressure sodium is at the bottom. It's one of the most energy efficient. LED is just above that. This table basically compares the 4 most popular types of light sources. And you can see the CRI, the higher the CRI, the better. Lamp light, the higher, the better. And lighting efficiency, the higher, the better. Low pressure sodium, again listed on the bottom, has an adequate lamp life and a decent lighting efficiency. The lamp life of the low pressure sodium is lower than the LED, for example, but the lighting efficiency is higher. So even though you have to replace the bulbs more often, you're putting less energy in to get the light out. The big comparison here is low pressure sodium, the CRI is a 5, where most of the other ones, especially the LEDs, is up to 75. Low pressure sodium does not show colors well at night. Okay, so this will be my last technical slide, and if you can bear with me just a little bit more. This slide shows on the black vertical bands, it shows the different types of lighting sources, and the horizontal bands are the filters that the observatory has and can block out. If you look, the top LED is at the bottom and low pressure sodium is at the top. And the takeaway here is that the only lighting source that is capable of being completely filtered by the observatory is that low pressure sodium. So the recommendations of the study, although there was a long and very extensive list by agency, by stakeholder that participated, I boiled it down to the most pertinent points. And it's pretty straight up. Obviously, low pressure sodium fixtures are the best to support the Navy's mission at the observatory. This is particularly important for exterior fixtures, including street lights, parking lights, and any new large projects. However, low pressure sodium, if all the lights were low pressure sodium, then light pollution wouldn't be an issue for the Navy because they would just use the filter and there would be no impact. Seeing that that's really not the reality and that there are going to be other lighting sources for a variety of reasons, we've determined that good lighting practices, even with LED light bulbs, even with LED fixtures, can be nearly as effective. DDOT has made the decision to go ahead and use LED streetlights to replace all the lights in DC. They were involved in the study, but with these LED lights and hopefully with good lighting practices, we can mitigate most of the impacts. I'm still continuing to work with DDOT on that. So the best lighting practices Number two there, ensure that the light is directed where needed. We see very often that light is well beyond the limits of the sidewalk or the street or halfway up the building or glaring into a fifth floor window. And if we just train the light to where it needs to be and we can eliminate a lot of the light pollution. The third one is reduce the lighting levels. The study did measurements and came to the conclusion that in almost every instance, there was more light than was needed for the use. There were more fixtures, there were more bulbs, and higher wattage than that was needed. If we scale them back to the design criteria that is by the Illuminating Engineering Society, which is IES, which they make the lighting recommendations, that also we can decrease a lot of the light pollution. Minimizing interior light bleed. A lot of the light that we've discovered during the study was from unoccupied buildings at night where the lights were left on inside. There's a couple ways that we can address this by using opaque building materials, shades, or other light management techniques, and making sure that buildings, particularly office buildings, have occupancy sensors so that the lights turn off if there's nobody there to use them. Number 5 is promote the use of vegetation. This is increasing tree cover and vegetation, especially evergreens, so that they have the same effect in the winter. Trees, shrubs, these can all help prevent the scatter and bounce of light and adding to the overall sky glow. So just those 4 points of light management can significantly reduce light pollution in DC. The other recommendations is that enhance interagency collaboration. My job as the CPLO is to coordinate with other agencies and try to identify new projects that might be going up that might cause problems and ways to help mitigate those before we have a further degradation to the Navy's mission. And the last one is to adjust the Naval Observatory Overlay District. DCOZ is undergoing a rezoning right now, and they're basically converting the overlay districts into zoning. So the Naval Observatory Overlay District will become M28 zone. I need to continue to work with them and see about expanding it and adding the lighting requirements. Again, I want to reiterate these 3 topics. And that's light pollution is impacting the mission of the Navy Observatory here in DC. The mission is important, it's critical, it can't be moved. And that the light pollution can be reversed through extensive use of low pressure sodium bulbs, using those best lighting practices, and then just educating the public. If there's any comments and questions, there is listed the site for the Naval Observatory tours. They do hold them bi-weekly on Monday evenings, and you can sign up through that website.
Thank you, Ms. Herring, for a very interesting presentation. Is this full study available on your website as well, or parts of it?
I have it, and I can provide a copy.
Okay.
I don't know that.
Provide it to
it's
staff, and they
Sure.
can share.
Actually, Mike, you probably have a copy of it from 2 years ago.
We have several copies saved electronically on our network, so.
I'd be interested in if you could email that to me. Any comments or questions from the commissioners? Commissioner White.
I just have a question. I noticed you work with the International Dark Sky Association. Are they referenced in one of these? Do they help you get the word out about light pollution? Because it's an issue in lots of places.
It is. The International Dark Sky Association, they have some standards and recommendations for optimizing the night sky, and those were used in the study and in providing the recommendations. We produce those handouts, and I attend the Glover Park Civic Association meetings, the Glover Park Day. Those handouts, I try to get them out as much as I can to increase public education.
Further questions? Commissioner Parancha.
Appreciate the presentation. It looks like zoning is one of the key recommendations that could be implemented. For example, do we know at this point if the folks will use the IES standard? That seems like that would help a lot to get the right type of lighting.
Within the new zoning?
Right.
They're really, at this point, they're really adopting the existing zoning and they're converting it into a different language. They're
Gotcha.
going from overlays into a new M28 zoning. I still need to do coordination with DCOP and pursue the expansion of the overlay area or this new zoning area and inclusion of the lighting standards.
Okay. Appreciate your efforts to avoid targeting of those strategic weapons that you had talked about in the zones that might be contributing to this light pollution. Hopefully that would be a last resort.
Commissioner Hart.
Well, by the Naval Observatory, it's 2:46 and I am done.
Wait, I think there's just a couple more questions.
Just
Sorry.
one question. You spoke about the time service and the clock. That doesn't have anything to do with this light pollution, does it?
No, it's just two of the missions that that occur at the observatory. They are not impacted by the lighting.
I have one last question, since I live close by to the cathedral. You mentioned the cathedral as a source of some of the lighting that the Naval Observatory experiences. Have you had discussions with them about ways that they can still illuminate that cathedral, but not have the spread out pollution?
That picture, the National Cathedral in itself is not a site-specific light pollution issue for the observatory. That was used as an example of how uplighting adds to sky glow and just light pollution in DC in general. But uplighting, there's certain things in DC we're not going to get away from uplighting. They're going to light up the Washington Monument. I don't know if there's room to talk to them about using low-pressure sodium either, but that will be a hurdle I have to try.
One follow-on question related to this. This clearly has an economic component. Is there perhaps funding available? Is there perhaps funding available to help encourage some of the local jurisdictions?
That would be something that I would want to...
Either through the Navy or perhaps Department of Energy grants, money that could be used to subsidize some of this?
The Navy, I don't think the Navy has extra money unless you're offering some, but that is something that I've talked to different components and need to work with DC more to see if there's any kind of incentives. DDOE was involved in this project, and that was one of the areas we touched upon. I haven't really had a chance. We have not continued and gotten any further with that at this time.
And unfortunately, I think DDOE's major funding in that area is to promote the use of LEDs. So in terms of what you are thinking about proposing for the expansion of the Naval Observatory District, or what was formerly known as the Naval Observatory District and now has that catchy title, M28 or whatever, would you be proposing standards in that for exterior lighting?
That would be the goal. We would, obviously, this is a conversation that we need to have further with DCOP, which is providing the wording to DCOZ. And yes, there would be some standards, some particularly regarding large developments, large projects that come online, exterior lighting, parking lot lighting, the types of fixtures, and ensuring that they're shielded. You know, DDOT is using LED lights, but they're saying that the LED lights are directional. That instead of just getting a big cone of light, that it basically they can direct it, and that they're getting 90% of the light going where it needs to go. Some of it is going to reflect off wet pavement, different pavement types, and bounce back into the sky, scatter, and become sky glow, which can't be filtered out. But that's a conversation, and that is a goal. That's where we're looking to go. If we want to keep the functions available to the observatory, that's the direction we need to move.
Okay, so because some of your concerns, at least, I mean, street lighting, obviously you've talked to DDOT, I assume even with the Washington Globes, you're saying they can target that some down, but with Washington Globes, that's probably hard to control as much as you would like. but that's beyond zoning because it's on public space and sidewalks as well. But have you had conversations with the Streetscape Committee?
I have not with the Streetscapes Committee.
Because that would probably, that would be where you would go to at least look at reflectivity of sidewalk surfaces and other elements in the public space. And they probably would be very, they're very concerned about sustainability issues broadly, but I think they would probably be receptive to what could they do in terms of articulating sidewalk standards or other public space standards that might assist.
Thank you.
I mean, Office of Planning is a participant in that, so I can recommend it to our representative, but it would be good for you to do a presentation to the entire Streetscape Committee. I think that'd be useful.
One final comment. There are some local jurisdictions that have installed LED lighting. I know one in Arlington County, and there were some lessons learned about brightness and direction and directing the cone of light. So.
Yes, I haven't I have not actually reached out to Arlington County yet. Unfortunately, the CPLO position is a one-man team, and I have 7 installations in the area. However, that is on my list, and with the briefings, we're going out to Glover Park on Tuesday night, and the Glover Park Day is coming up in June. So with all of this on the observatory, I do plan to reignite this effort. Well,
thank you very much for this presentation. It was very, very illuminating. And with that, if there's no other business to come before the commission, the open session is adjourned.